Welcome to the Haunted Lore, where we explore the shadows between fact and folklore, going deep into the mysteries that have captivated humanity for generations. We're embarking on a chilling journey across the vast wilderness of Canada, a land where ancient indigenous traditions merge with modern, unexplained encounters. From the misty forests of British Columbia to the frozen tundra of the Northwest Territories, Canada's immense landscape has harbored stories of creatures that defy conventional explanation for centuries. Today, we'll investigate 5 of Canada's most compelling cryptids, examining the historical roots of each legend, the cultural significance behind the stories, and the modern encounters that keep these mysteries alive. Whether you're a skeptic seeking rational explanations or a believer in the unknown, prepare yourself for an exploration of creatures that exist in that unsettling space between myth and reality. What ancient terror still roams the forests of British Columbia? Deep in the dense rainforests of British Columbia, where towering cedars create cathedral-like canopies and morning mist clings to moss-covered ground, dwells perhaps North America's most famous cryptid, Sasquatch. But to understand this creature's true significance, we must first recognize that Sasquatch isn't merely a modern monster movie creation. It represents one of the oldest and most widespread indigenous traditions on the continent. The indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest have spoken of these forest giants for thousands of years, long before European contact brought new interpretations to ancient knowledge. The Halkomelem word Saskats gives us our modern term, but nearly every indigenous nation from Alaska to Northern California maintains distinct traditions about these elusive beings. The Lummi called them Tsemeko, the Kino knew them as Seaiteko, and the Lakota spoke of Chiatanka. These weren't random folklore. They were consistent descriptions of intelligent, bipedal creatures that commanded both respect and fear. Traditional indigenous accounts describe beings standing 8 to 10 feet tall, covered in dark, coarse hair, with impossibly broad shoulders and arms extending nearly to their knees. Their faces combined human and ape-like features, with prominent brow ridges, flat noses, and eyes that gleamed with an unsettling intelligence. Most disturbing were their hands, described as human-like but massive, capable of crushing bones with ease. The creatures weren't merely physical threats. Indigenous traditions often portrayed them as spiritual beings existing at the boundary between the human and natural worlds. Some nations considered them protectors of the forest, punishing those who showed disrespect to nature. Others viewed them as omens, their appearance signaling coming disasters or significant changes. The Kino believed that seeing a Sasquatch face-to-face would bring death within a year, a belief that may have originated from the creature's alleged territorial nature and aggressive responses to human intrusion. What makes the Sasquatch phenomenon particularly compelling is how these ancient descriptions align remarkably with modern encounters. Contemporary witnesses consistently report creatures matching traditional indigenous descriptions. Massive bipedal beings covered in dark hair, standing 7 to 9 feet tall, with distinctive cone-shaped heads and powerful builds. The behavioral patterns also remain consistent. These creatures are described as primarily nocturnal, incredibly elusive, and possessing strength far beyond any known animal. The Pacific Northwest's geography provides perfect habitat for such a creature. The region's dense forests, with undergrowth so thick that visibility often extends only a few feet, could easily conceal large animals. The abundant salmon runs, berry patches, and root vegetables would provide sufficient food sources for omnivorous giants. The countless caves, fallen logs, and secluded valleys offer unlimited hiding places. Most importantly, vast areas of this wilderness remain completely unexplored by humans, creating refuges where unknown species could potentially survive undetected. Modern Sasquatch research has evolved beyond simple monster hunting into systematic investigation, combining indigenous knowledge with scientific methodology. Researchers analyze footprint casts, examine hair samples, and study audio recordings of alleged Sasquatch vocalizations. While definitive proof remains elusive, the consistency of reports across centuries and cultures suggests something genuine underlies the legend. The creature's psychological impact on witnesses proves particularly fascinating. Unlike hoax claims or misidentifications, genuine Sasquatch encounters typically leave witnesses profoundly shaken, often reluctant to share their experiences due to fear of ridicule. Many describe an overwhelming sense of being watched in the forest, feeling like prey under the gaze of an apex predator. This primal fear response suggests encounters with something that triggers deep evolutionary warnings about dangerous megafauna. Perhaps most unsettling is the intelligence attributed to these creatures. Witnesses often describe deliberate behaviors. Sasquatch apparently using tools, demonstrating problem-solving abilities, and showing tactical thinking in avoiding human contact. Some accounts describe creatures deliberately leading humans away from certain areas, suggesting territorial awareness and strategic thinking. If such beings exist, they represent not just unknown animals, but potentially a form of non-human intelligence sharing our world. Could a primordial lake monster really inhabit Canada's waters? In the depths of Lake Okanagan, a serpentine shadow allegedly glides through waters so deep that their bottom has never been fully mapped. Ogopogo, British Columbia's legendary lake monster, represents more than just a tourist attraction. It embodies one of Canada's most persistent and culturally significant cryptozoological mysteries, rooted in indigenous traditions that predate European colonization by millennia. The Silks people, original inhabitants of the Okanagan Valley, spoke of Naha-a-Itk, the lake demon, for countless generations before white settlers arrived. This wasn't a benevolent creature from children's stories. Naha-a-Itki was a powerful and dangerous entity demanding respect and propitiation. Traditional protocols required travelers to offer gifts when crossing the lake: tobacco, food, or small animals thrown into the water to appease the creature and ensure safe passage. Those who failed to show proper respect risked being dragged beneath the surface, never to return. The indigenous descriptions established characteristics that remain consistent in modern accounts. Naha-a-Itk was described as an enormous serpentine creature, dark green or black in color, with multiple humps visible when it surfaced. Its head resembled that of a horse or goat, featuring prominent horns or protrusions. The creature's length was estimated at 40 to 70 feet, with a body as thick as a large tree trunk. Most disturbing were accounts of its appetite. Naha-a-Itk allegedly fed on large animals, including humans who ventured too close to its domain. When European settlers arrived in the mid-19th centuries, they initially dismissed indigenous warnings as primitive superstition. However, their skepticism quickly eroded as they began experiencing their own encounters with the lake's mysterious inhabitant. The name Ogopogo emerged in the early 1900s, derived from a popular British music hall song, but the creature being described matched traditional indigenous accounts with unsettling accuracy. Early settler encounters often involved fishing expeditions or lake crossings that turned terrifying. Witnesses described seeing massive undulating movements beneath their boats, creating waves in calm water and generating currents that threatened to capsize vessels. Some reported glimpsing portions of an enormous serpentine body breaking the surface, its dark coils extending much further than any known lakefish. The creature's alleged ability to generate powerful underwater currents became a recurring theme, with boats mysteriously changing direction or being pulled toward deeper water despite calm weather conditions. Lake Okanagan itself provides an ideal environment for concealing large aquatic life. Stretching 135 kilometers in length and reaching depths of over 230 meters, the lake contains numerous underwater caves, thermal vents, and unexplored areas. The lake's unique geological features include underwater cliff faces, deep trenches, and complex cave systems that could provide perfect refuge for large aquatic creatures. The abundant fish population, including salmon, trout, and various smaller species, would provide ample food sources for a large predator. The lake's thermal characteristics add another intriguing element. Okanagan maintains surprisingly warm temperatures for its northern latitude, with thermal layers that could support creatures adapted to specific temperature ranges. Underground hot springs feed into the lake, creating thermal refuges where large creatures could survive harsh winter conditions. These same thermal features might explain the creature's alleged seasonal patterns. More sightings occur during warmer months when thermal conditions favor surface activity. Modern Ogopogo encounters maintain remarkable consistency with historical accounts. Witnesses typically describe seeing multiple humps moving through the water in undulating patterns, suggesting a creature with a flexible, serpentine body structure. The head, when visible, appears horse-like or reptilian, often showing small protrusions that could be horns, ears, or sensory organs. The creature's coloration is consistently described as dark green to black, providing perfect camouflage in the lake's depths. Photographic and video evidence remains frustratingly inconclusive, yet intriguingly persistent. While no single piece of evidence provides definitive proof, the cumulative weight of consistent reports across more than a century suggests something genuinely anomalous inhabits the lake. Sonar readings have detected large moving objects in the lake's depths that don't correspond to known fish species or underwater debris. These readings show objects of significant size moving in patterns inconsistent with floating logs or other inanimate materials. The creature's behavioral patterns, as described by witnesses, suggest intelligence and territorial awareness. Ogopogo sightings often occur in specific areas of the lake, particularly near deeper sections and around underwater cave entrances. The creature appears to avoid areas of heavy human activity, emerging primarily during quiet periods when few boats disturb the water. This behavioral pattern suggests either learned avoidance of humans or instinctive territorial behavior that recognizes threats. Perhaps most compelling are the psychological effects reported by witnesses. Unlike casual monster spotters or publicity seekers, many Ogopogo witnesses display genuine distress when recounting their experiences. They describe feeling watched from beneath the water, sensing a powerful presence that triggered primal fear responses. Some report dreams or recurring nightmares following their encounters, suggesting experiences that affected them on a deep psychological level. What cannibalistic horror stalks the northern wilderness? In the vast boreal forests of northern Canada, where winter temperatures plummet to life-threatening extremes and darkness can stretch for months, lurks perhaps the most terrifying creature in North American folklore, the Wendigo. Unlike other cryptids that inspire curiosity mixed with fear, the Wendigo represents pure existential horror, a being born from humanity's darkest impulses and most desperate circumstances. The Wendigo originates from Algonquian-speaking peoples, including the Ojibwe, Cree, and Innu nations, who inhabited the harsh northern regions where survival often balanced on the knife's edge between life and death. To these indigenous cultures, the Wendigo wasn't simply a monster story designed to frighten children. It embodied a very real psychological and spiritual danger that could consume individuals who crossed certain moral boundaries during times of extreme hardship. Traditional accounts describe the transformation process with chilling detail. A person driven to cannibalism during desperate circumstances, perhaps trapped by blizzards with no food or lost in the wilderness facing starvation, would begin changing after consuming human flesh. The transformation wasn't immediate, but occurred gradually as the act of cannibalism corrupted both body and spirit. The person's humanity would slowly drain away, replaced by an insatiable hunger for human flesh and a complete loss of moral restraint. The physical description of a fully transformed Wendigo varies across different indigenous traditions, but common elements create a consistently terrifying image. The creature stands 8 to 15 feet tall, with yellowed fangs, sunken eyes that glow with malevolent intelligence, and skin that appears stretched tight over an emaciated frame. Despite its gaunt appearance, the Wendigo possesses supernatural strength and speed, capable of moving through dense forest with impossible silence. Its fingers end in razor-sharp claws, perfect for tearing flesh, and its voice can mimic human speech to lure victims into isolated areas. Most disturbing is the creature's psychological profile. The Wendigo retains enough human intelligence to be cunning and manipulative, but lacks any trace of human compassion or moral restraint. It understands human weaknesses and exploits them ruthlessly, often targeting isolated individuals or small groups it can overpower. The creature's cannibalistic nature isn't driven by simple hunger, but by a supernatural compulsion that can never be satisfied. Each meal only intensifies its craving for human flesh. The Wendigo phenomenon served multiple functions within indigenous communities. On a practical level, it reinforced the absolute taboo against cannibalism, even under the most desperate circumstances. Communities living through harsh winters with limited food supplies understood that breaking this taboo could lead to psychological changes that destroyed the social bonds necessary for group survival. The Wendigo legend provided a stark warning about the consequences of crossing this line. On a deeper psychological level, the Wendigo represented the fear of losing one's humanity under extreme stress. Northern indigenous peoples understood that survival in their harsh environment required maintaining both individual strength and community cooperation. The Wendigo embodied what happened when individuals prioritized personal survival over community welfare, becoming monsters that threatened everyone around them. Historical accounts of actual Wendigo psychosis demonstrate the legend's real-world impact. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, several documented cases involved individuals who believed they were transforming into Wendigos or claimed to be possessed by Wendigo spirits. These cases typically occurred during particularly harsh winters when food supplies were scarce and isolation was extreme. Affected individuals would develop an obsessive fear of becoming cannibalistic, often accompanied by depression, anxiety, and, in some cases, actual cannibalistic urges. The case of Swift Runner in 1878 provides one of the most well-documented examples. This Cree trapper allegedly killed and consumed his family during a harsh winter near Fort Saskatchewan. When questioned, Swift Runner claimed he had been possessed by a Wendigo spirit that compelled his actions. While modern psychology might diagnose such cases as severe mental illness exacerbated by isolation and stress, indigenous communities understood them within the framework of spiritual possession and transformation. Modern encounters with Wendigo-like creatures continue throughout northern Canada, though they're often reported by individuals unfamiliar with the traditional indigenous context. Witnesses describe encounters with impossibly tall, emaciated humanoid figures moving through forests with unnatural speed and stealth. These creatures often appear during winter months, particularly in areas where people have died or disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The creature's alleged hunting patterns reflect its supernatural intelligence and predatory nature. Wendigos reportedly stalk victims for extended periods, learning their routines and identifying moments of vulnerability. They use their ability to mimic human voices to lure people away from safety, often calling victims' names in familiar voices to draw them into isolated areas. Once isolated, victims face a creature possessing both supernatural strength and the cunning intelligence of a human predator. Particularly unsettling are reports of Wendigo encounters near sites of historical tragedy, abandoned mining camps where people died of starvation, remote areas where travelers disappeared during harsh winters, or locations where desperate circumstances may have driven people to cannibalism. These patterns suggest either that Wendigos are drawn to places associated with human suffering and desperation, or that the traumatic energy of such locations somehow contributes to their manifestation. The Wendigo's persistence in modern folklore reflects humanity's ongoing struggle with the balance between civilization and savagery, community welfare and individual survival. In a world where extreme situations can still push people beyond moral boundaries, the Wendigo serves as a reminder of how quickly the veneer of civilization can disappear when survival is at stake. Does an ancient aquatic predator still hunt in Ontario's deep waters? Beneath the murky waters of Lake Simcoe, Ontario, an ancient horror allegedly continues its prehistoric hunt. Igapogo, Lake Simcoe's legendary creature, represents one of Canada's most underappreciated cryptozoological mysteries, a being whose reported characteristics suggest something far more terrifying than the relatively benign lake monsters of popular culture. The region's indigenous peoples, primarily the Huron-Wendat and later the Chippewa, maintained oral traditions about a powerful water spirit inhabiting the lake's deepest sections. Unlike some lake creatures described as merely large animals, the being in Lake Simcoe was characterized as actively malevolent, a predator that deliberately hunted humans who ventured onto its territory. Traditional protocols required specific rituals and offerings before crossing the lake, and certain areas were considered completely off-limits due to the creature's presence. Indigenous descriptions portrayed a creature combining serpentine and crocodilian characteristics. The being possessed a massive, elongated body covered in dark scales or armored plates, with powerful jaws lined with razor-sharp teeth. Its head was described as disproportionately large, featuring prominent eyes adapted for underwater hunting, and a mouth capable of opening wide enough to swallow a canoe whole. Most disturbing were accounts of its intelligence. The creature allegedly understood human behavior well enough to set traps and ambushes. Early European settlers initially dismissed these warnings as primitive superstition, but their attitudes quickly changed as they began experiencing their own terrifying encounters. The creature earned its modern name Igopogo in reference to other famous lake monsters. But early settler accounts suggested something far more aggressive than its more famous cousins. Unlike creatures that seemed content to avoid human contact, Lake Simcoe's monster appeared to actively hunt people. Historical records from the mid-1800s describe several incidents where fishing parties or travelers crossing the lake encountered massive disturbances in the water, followed by attacks on their vessels. Witnesses reported seeing an enormous dark shape approaching their boats from below, followed by impacts powerful enough to splinter wooden hulls. Several documented cases involved boats being pulled underwater by some unseen force, with survivors describing feeling like they were being dragged down by something with incredible strength. Lake Simcoe's geography provides ideal conditions for concealing large aquatic predators. The lake reaches depths of over 40 meters and contains numerous underwater caves, submerged rock formations, and areas of thermal activity that could provide perfect hunting grounds for ambush predators. The lake's connection to Georgian Bay through the Severn River creates potential migration routes for creatures moving between different bodies of water. During winter months, the thick ice cover would provide perfect concealment for creatures active in the water below. The lake's abundant fish population, including large species like muskellunge, pike, and lake trout, would provide ample food sources for a large predator. However, historical accounts suggest Igopogo's diet wasn't limited to fish. Reports describe attacks on swimming livestock, with cattle and horses disappearing from shoreline areas under mysterious circumstances. Most disturbingly, several human disappearances over the decades occurred under conditions suggesting something pulled victims beneath the surface rather than typical drowning scenarios. Modern encounters with Igopogo maintain the creature's reputation for aggressive behavior. Unlike passive lake monsters that flee when discovered, witnesses describe a creature that seems curious about or even attracted to human activity. Boaters report seeing large dark shapes following their vessels, sometimes for considerable distances. These encounters often involve the creature surfacing near boats, apparently investigating or sizing up potential prey. Fishing guides and local residents describe patterns in the creature's behavior that suggest intelligence and territorial awareness. Sightings tend to cluster around specific areas of the lake, particularly near deeper sections and underwater drop-offs, where large predators would naturally hunt. The creature appears most active during dawn and dusk hours, following patterns typical of aquatic predators, but showing unusual persistence when investigating human activity. Sonar readings from the lake have detected large moving objects that don't correspond to known fish species or underwater debris. These readings show objects of significant size moving in deliberate patterns near the lake bottom, sometimes approaching boats from below before changing direction. The size and movement patterns suggest something much larger than any known fish species, moving with purpose rather than random motion. Photographic evidence remains limited but intriguing. Several images and videos show large, dark shapes moving through the water, often near boats or shoreline areas. While image quality prevents definitive identification, the objects shown are clearly much larger than known fish and move in ways inconsistent with floating debris or other inanimate materials. The psychological impact on witnesses separates genuine Igopogo encounters from hoaxes or misidentifications. People who claim to have encountered the creature often display genuine distress and reluctance to return to certain areas of the lake. Many describe feeling like they were being hunted or stalked, experiencing the primal fear response associated with being targeted by a large predator. This psychological pattern suggests encounters with something that triggers deep evolutionary warnings about aquatic dangers. Perhaps most unsettling are reports of the creature's apparent learning behavior. Local guides describe changes in the creature's patterns over time, suggesting it adapts its behavior based on human activity. Areas that once produced frequent sightings become quiet after increased boat traffic, while the creature appears in new locations that offer better concealment. This behavioral adaptation implies intelligence sufficient to recognize threats and modify hunting strategies accordingly. What gigantic beast of burden still roams the Canadian wilderness? In the remote wilderness of northern Canada, where vast forests stretch beyond the horizon and winter silence can drive travelers to madness, indigenous traditions speak of a creature so massive it defies modern understanding of biological possibility. Bauman, known by various names across different indigenous cultures, represents perhaps the most physically imposing cryptid in North American folklore. A giant bear-like creature, whose size and strength supposedly exceed any known animal species. The creature's name derives from various indigenous languages across the northern regions, with different nations maintaining distinct but remarkably consistent traditions about these forest giants. The Cree spoke of Mistahi Masqua, meaning Great Bear, while northern Ojibwe traditions described Mikinak, a bear spirit of enormous proportions. Despite variations in naming and specific cultural interpretations, the fundamental characteristics described across cultures remain startlingly uniform. Traditional accounts describe Bauman as standing 12 to 20 feet tall when upright, with a body mass that would dwarf even the largest known bears. Unlike regular bears, Bauman possessed proportions suggesting adaptation for both quadrupedal and bipedal locomotion, with rear legs powerful enough to support its massive frame in an upright position. Its forelimbs were described as disproportionately long and muscular, ending in claws capable of tearing through the largest trees as easily as kindling. The creature's head was reportedly massive even in proportion to its enormous body, featuring an elongated snout filled with teeth designed for both tearing flesh and crushing bones. Its eyes were described as showing unusual intelligence, suggesting cognitive abilities beyond those of normal bears. Most disturbing was its coat, described as darker than normal black bear fur, so dark it seemed to absorb light, making the creature difficult to see clearly even in daylight. Indigenous traditions portrayed Bauman as more than simply an oversized bear. The creature was often described as a guardian spirit of the deep wilderness, punishing humans who showed disrespect to the forest or violated traditional hunting protocols. Some accounts describe the creature as possessing shamanic powers, able to influence weather patterns, communicate with other forest animals, and even affect human consciousness. Encounters with Bauman were often interpreted as spiritual tests or warnings about proper relationships with the natural world. The creature's alleged behavioral patterns reflected both bear-like characteristics and distinctly unusual traits. Like normal bears, Bauman was described as primarily solitary, maintaining vast territories that could span hundreds of square miles. However, unlike typical bears, Bauman allegedly showed deliberate territorial marking behavior that went beyond simple scent marking. Witnesses describe finding massive claw marks carved deep into large trees, far higher than any normal bear could reach, seemingly placed as warnings to human intruders. Historical accounts from fur traders and early explorers describe encounters with tracks and sign indicating bears of impossible size. Trading post records from the Hudson's Bay Company include several accounts of trappers discovering footprints measuring over 20 inches in length, with claw marks suggesting digits of extraordinary size and strength. These tracks were often found in areas where normal bear sign was completely absent, suggesting the creature's presence actually deterred smaller bears from entering its territory. The creature's alleged strength became legendary among northern peoples. Stories describe Bauman moving massive boulders that would require heavy machinery to relocate, uprooting entire trees to access root systems or honey sources, and creating trails through dense forest by simply pushing through obstacles rather than going around them. Most impressive were accounts of the creature's ability to break through ice formations that would stop normal bears, allowing it to access food sources during harsh winter conditions when other animals were struggling to survive. Modern encounters with Bauman-like creatures continue throughout Canada's northern wilderness, often reported by experienced outdoorsmen who understand normal bear behavior and recognize when they're observing something anomalous. These witnesses describe encounters with bears displaying size, strength, and behavioral patterns that exceed anything documented in scientific literature. Contemporary accounts often focus on the creature's tracks and sign rather than direct visual encounters, suggesting Bauman's legendary elusiveness remains intact. Hunters and trappers report finding claw marks on trees at heights that would require ladders for humans to reach, footprints that dwarf those of known bear species, and feeding sign indicating an animal capable of accessing food sources beyond the reach of normal bears. The creature's alleged seasonal patterns reflect adaptation to Canada's extreme northern climate. Sightings and sign are most commonly reported during late fall and early spring, periods when normal bears would be entering or emerging from hibernation. This pattern suggests either that Bauman doesn't hibernate in the same manner as regular bears, or that its massive size allows it to remain active under conditions that would force smaller bears into dormancy. Forest rangers and wildlife biologists occasionally encounter evidence they struggle to explain within conventional understanding of bear behavior and biology. Tree damage showing claw marks at impossible heights, tracks indicating bears of extraordinary size, and feeding patterns suggesting animals with capabilities beyond known species create ongoing mysteries within Canada's wilderness management community. The psychological impact of alleged Bauman encounters often proves more intense than typical bear encounters. Witnesses frequently describe feeling overwhelmed by the creature's presence, experiencing a sense of being in the presence of something truly primal and powerful. Unlike fear responses to normal bears, which typically focus on immediate physical danger, Bauman encounters often leave witnesses feeling like they've encountered something that challenges their understanding of what's possible in the natural world. Perhaps most intriguing are patterns suggesting Bauman's awareness of human presence and deliberate avoidance of direct contact. Despite its massive size, the creature reportedly moves through dense forest with surprising stealth, suggesting intelligence sufficient to recognize when humans are present and adjust its behavior accordingly. This combination of massive physical presence and sophisticated behavioral adaptation would represent a unique evolutionary development in bear species if such creatures actually exist. As we conclude our journey through Canada's cryptozoological landscape, we find ourselves confronting questions that extend far beyond simple monster hunting. These 5 creatures, Sasquatch, Ogopogo, the Wendigo, Igopogo, and Bauman, represent more than just unexplained phenomena. They embody humanity's complex relationship with the unknown, our deep-seated fears about what might still lurk in the world's wild places, and our ongoing struggle to understand the boundaries between reality and myth. What makes these Canadian cryptids particularly compelling is their foundation in indigenous traditions that predate European colonization by thousands of years. These weren't stories created for entertainment or tourism, but integral parts of cultural knowledge systems that helped people understand and survive in challenging environments. The consistency of these accounts across centuries and cultures suggests something genuine underlies the legends, even if we can't yet explain what that something might be. Modern Canada, despite its developed infrastructure and technological advancement, still contains vast wilderness areas where unknown species could potentially survive undetected. The boreal forests, deep lakes, and remote mountain ranges that gave birth to these legends remain largely unexplored and continue producing encounters that defy easy explanation. In a world where we assume science has catalogued every significant species, these persistent mysteries remind us how much we still don't know about our own planet. The search for truth about these creatures continues, combining traditional indigenous knowledge with modern investigative techniques. Perhaps future technology will provide definitive answers about what lurks in Canada's wilderness. Until then, these legends serve as guardians of mystery, protecting spaces for wonder and fear in our increasingly mapped and measured world. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of Canada's most mysterious inhabitants. If you found today's journey into the unknown as fascinating as I did, make sure to subscribe to the Haunted Lore podcast for more deep dives into the world's most compelling mysteries. Don't forget to leave us a review and share your own unexplained experiences in the comments. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your mind ready for the impossible. You never know what might be watching from the shadows.